John, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Hey, good evening, Ken.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. We were talking offline, and John's book. He's written three and built three that I know of. Is that right, John? Is it three? Okay,
Yeah.
and built to sell, being a really pretty transformational book for a lot of us. So we're going to dive into that as well as the other stuff that John's written. But welcome. I'd love to know, how you got here, John. How did you end up becoming the guy teaching people how to sell their businesses?
What a circuitous route. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it goes back to a meeting I had in, gosh, it must have been 2003 or four now with a guy named Perry Miele. And Perry's an M&A professional. And at the time, I ran a marketing services business. We did market research and we had giant customers, Microsoft, IBM, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, all these very large companies. And I thought my company would be valuable because of our client list. And I was very proud of the clients we worked with, all these
Sure.
blue chip names. And I went to Perry and I said that we got it up to about $5 or $6 million in revenue, profitable, 20-30% profit margins each month. And I said, Perry, like, what do you think it's worth? And he said, well, before I answer that, let me ask you a couple of questions. I'm like, shoot. And he's like, okay, well, who does the research? And I said, well, it's Microsoft, it's IBM. I got to be involved in that stuff, right? I got to at least sign off on it. He's like, okay, well, who does the selling? I'm like, well, what part of it's Microsoft and IBM did you not
Right.
get? Like,
Right.
we're a small company. Of course, I've got to be the guy, on the road, shaking hands and kissing babies and making sure everybody's well taken care of. And he said, John, I can't sell your company. There's nothing to sell. It's you, man. You got a job, not a company,
Yeah.
and it's worthless. And again, that's a trite old expression nowadays, but back then it hit me between the eyes because I had thought I had built an amazing success story, right? Like a $5 or $6 million business, more than seven figures of profit, these
Right.
good housekeeping seal approval kind of clients. And I thought, man, I've made it. And he's telling me I've made nothing.
Right.
So that really was difficult. And I spent a couple of years reimagining that business with Perry's help and a lot of other people. We created recurring revenue. So we moved from a project-based business to a subscription-based company. I got out of doing the selling. We brought in a sales team and we kind of built this whole business back up from scratch. Ultimately, it was acquired by a New York Stock Exchange listed company. You'd know them as Gartner Group.
Oh yeah.
And so it had a happy ending, but it triggered for me this passion that I still have today, which is understanding what makes a company valuable, going beyond the kind of standard prevailing EBITDA multiple that a lot of entrepreneurs have heard in their market, and
Right.
kind of understanding that there are other drivers, there are other things that impact the value of a company. And so that's what I do today, and sort of how I got into this journey.
Yeah. When I was younger, my wife and I owned a first aid and safety supply company, just a B2B kind of services company that we,
Oh, cool.
drive vans up to people's business and restock their stuff. And we had a few vans on the road, and we got bought by a much larger company in like a pooling of interest back then, where you could do kind of stock for stock. And I remember back then I was very concerned with our profitability and like kind of trimmed it before they came in to kind of analyze things. What do I need to cut? And all they cared about was the top line, because my expenses were not necessarily going to be their expenses. My lease was not going to be. They cared about leases in the extent that if you just signed one and it was now going to become their liability, that was a
Liability,
problem.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And certainly employees that were dead weight or something, that would be a problem. But for the most part, it was like, no, it's going to be our buildings, it's going to be our sales. And to some degree, they might be able to do something with the margins as well, like even short term. And so, and after that sale, I ended up doing a lot of acquisitions for that company on the other side, being the point
Oh,
guy.
cool. Okay. So you've
Yeah.
lived this stuff.
To a degree, but I was always looking at trying to know. Yeah, I'm like, what do those sales mean for us? If we're buying a $20 million company, what does that mean to us? I mean, there's $20 million that could lose money for us. There's $20 million that we can make $5 million on, and kind of everything in between, right? And yeah, so I love this. So I had a similar feedback when I asked for somebody to invest in my business a while back, and The thing that hit me when you said it, because it was the exact same thing that you said to me, is you said, there's nothing to sell here. And I went, Jesus Christ, like a low valuation would have been okay. How about like nothing to sell here? You know what I mean? Can we meet
Yeah.
in the middle? Can we, like, I thought it was worth, let's see, you were making, sounds like $1 million a year in profit. How about 5X? How about 5 million? Is that appropriate? Like, I'm sure you went into that conversation thinking that and came
Sure.
out with, I got a lot of work to do, right?
Yeah, yeah, and there is a threshold beyond which a business is not sellable, right?
Yeah.
So at any price, and that's something that you think about a home or a piece of commercial real estate, like that will sell. Like there is a price at which will be a market clearing price.
Yes.
Businesses aren't necessarily the same. If they are too dependent on the owner, they've got too much liability, too much debt, it doesn't necessarily ever work out for the owner. It doesn't always sell. And so you're right. There is a threshold by which a business is not just poorly valued or undervalued, it's literally not sellable. And
Right.
and so it's oftentimes comes down to the owner dependence question as to like how dependent is the company on its owner. Valuability, we call this hub and spoke, which basically means the dependency on the owner. And if it is high, it's very hard to trade that business. You might be able to sell it using an earnout where the founder or entrepreneur stays on for a period of time and tries to achieve a certain set of goals in the future. Those are fraught with challenges for a lot of leaders because if you think about the leadership characteristics of an entrepreneur, right? Like coloring outside the lines,
Mm-hmm.
very confident in their ability to do something that many people have never done, a bit rebellious in their nature. I think it's fair to say, for many of us. And then you put them in a box, which is a corporate environment where they're told to reach a certain goal, but within a playing field, right? There's a set of
Yes.
rules you have to live by. That can be very, very emotionally draining for an entrepreneur.
Yes.
They can do it intellectually, but just the being put into a hamster wheel and being handcuffed with a set of rules, it feels like just a totally fish out of water environment. And so while businesses depend on their owners, you can sell them with an earnout. That period of time, many entrepreneurs characterize as some of their lowest points of their kind of professional career.
Yeah, we had a lot of that where we would, tie it back into the deal. Not the whole thing would be on the back end, but like 50% up front and 50% on an earnout. And then like there's all the things you talked about, like the cultural compatibility and like following in and following a system and policies and procedures. And then that can actually turn legal, right? Because it's like, hey, if I could have just done it my way, I could have made my earnout, right? So you guys are actually costing me money because of the policies that you have. I think a lot of business owners too, this would be, I guess, less sophisticated or ones that have not been through a sale before. But I've met a lot of small business owners that they almost take pride in the fact that the place can't run without them. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
sort of like
It's a badge of honor.
yeah, it'll fall apart if I'm not here. And they're saying that to the person that's going to buy them. And it's like you might want to lose, the identity that you have tied to that,
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because I actually observed an entrepreneur describing that. He actually used the kind of inspiration for the title we call Hub and Spoke. It's actually based on a story where I observed an entrepreneur describing himself as the hub in a wheel. And his customers, suppliers, and employees all were spokes. And so if anything needed to get done, supplier needed a quote approved, employee wanted to take a vacation day, whatever, they would come through the hub. And you're right, he was very proud of that. Like it was a badge of honor for him. He's like, I got this thing under my thumb. I've got control. I'm running my company. And of course he was, and he could have been an incredibly profitable business, but largely unsellable at the same time. So it comes down to what's your motivation as an entrepreneur. Are you trying to create a business that can feed your lifestyle in the short term and you can suck out a lot of profitability in the short term and invest it in other things outside of your company? Or are you trying to build an asset that will be worth something to somebody else down the road? And
I think that hub and spoke analogy is hilarious because it's so egotistical too. I mean, I don't know the guy and maybe he's like a really nice guy, but just to think of yourself that way, right? It's almost like I'm the center of the universe when you think about it, right? And
Yeah.
then everything else orbits around me. It's kind of crazy. How did these early experiences in business for you, like where did that take you next? You know, when did you get into really understanding it and starting to teach these principles to other people?
Yeah, when I sold my most recent company, the one I was referencing earlier, I took some time and I wrote a book, Built to Sell, came out in 2011, and that actually evolved into the software company I own today, which is called Value Builder. We basically help people assess their business. So we help entrepreneurs assess their company across these 8 dimensions that business owners that drive the value of a company. And that really was inspired by the book. The book advisors came to me and said, "Hey, can we buy bulk copies of the book? Can we license your IP?" And it made me realize there's a whole group of advisors out there that want to talk to entrepreneurs about the value of their company, want to assess them. So yeah, Value Builder, we basically license our technology to advisors around the world, and they use it to assess businesses that they work with. So that's even what I'm doing today, 12 years later.
That's amazing. When you were writing Built to Sell, did you know it was going to hit as well as it did, or as widely,
No
I guess, as
idea.
it did? Because it seems like the kind of book, even though it's like super readable for anybody, it does seem like it's kind of specific, right? Like, hey, if you're an entrepreneur and you got a business and you're going to sell it, but then the popularity of it, I feel like, has spread. I mean, probably far beyond what you were initially thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I had the lawyer that did my last deal, the commercial lawyer that did the last sale, said there's a guy you should meet, and we had he was a mutual friend of my lawyer, and he just written a book. Tom Deans is his name. He's written a great book called Every Family's Business. We both happen to live in Toronto. He said you should go have lunch with Tom, and so I was regaling some stories about my career to Tom over lunch, and he says, "Man, you got to write this shit down. Like, this is really good stuff." And he just written this book, and I'm like, "All right, I'll go write down." Like, I literally went up to the third floor of our house. I was not working, and I started pecking away on my laptop. This book, I self-published the first edition. Was worried about like color and like print run and paper stock and all this nonsense. And if you ever get a first version of the book, there's a typo on page 1 and chapter 1. Like, literally, that's how bad it
Let me
was.
just see if I have a first run. Let's see. No, I don't think so.
It's got a totally different cover, but
Yeah.
I somehow, and I forgive me, Ken, I can't remember, but um the book got into the hands of Bo Burlingham. Do you know Bo?
No, I've heard the name, but I don't know personally.
Yeah, so he wrote, he's written many books. His most famous perhaps is a book called Small Giants.
Okay.
And a wonderful guy. He was an editor at large at Inc. magazine and had been with Inc. for 30 years prior to that. And Bo said, I can't remember, somebody gave him the book or whatever, and he said, "Man, like, this is a good book. You should get a publisher." And I'm like, "Well, how do I do that?" And he said, "Well, I'll get my agent to do it for you." And so he put me in touch with his agent. She pitched it to Random House in New York, like big, New York City kind of publisher.
Yeah.
And they said, "Yeah, we like it." And they asked me to create a new sort of action guide at the end, which sort of talks about how to implement the ideas, which allowed them to kind of publish it as a new book. And that was back, 2011. So Random House is the publisher, and it's been under their masthead since then. So
That's amazing.
yeah,
When going back to, your PE friends saying like, "Hey, you don't have anything to sell here." What
yeah.
were the things that you implemented back then that then led to a successful exit a couple of years later?
Yeah, a couple of things. And I'll kind of walk you through the labels we use, but hub and
Yeah.
spoke. So that was the dependency on me. So we hired for the 2 roles that I was describing earlier. So we hired a sales team. So I was not in charge of the selling anymore. And we also hired a senior researcher to lead the research. So I wasn't sort of approving research anymore. So we got those 2 pieces done, improving our hub and spoke score. We also improved our score dramatically on something called the Switzerland structure. So Switzerland structure gets its name from the country of Switzerland, which, as you know, was like obsessed with independence, didn't join any of the world wars, don't use the euro. And so we use that term independence to describe, or the Switzerland structure to describe how dependent a company is on a single customer, employee, or supplier. And of course, the best companies, the most valuable, are not dependent on any of those three groups, right? So we went from having at any one time 2 or 3 big clients. We moved to a subscription model and sold to hundreds of customers. And so that enabled us to improve our score on on customer dependency. Recurring revenue is a big driver of your value for lots of different reasons. So we went from doing kind of one-off research where Bank of America would call us up and say, "Oh, we want to do a quantitative research survey," and it's going to take 6 months, to syndicated research where we did one piece of research and then published it to all of our customers. That's a totally different business model. So those are 3 or 4 of the kind of very tactical things we did to make it less dependent on me and more of a sellable company.
So you had built, it sounds like in a fairly short period of time. I don't know, how long were you in business before that moment?
I'd had a couple of other businesses before the research business, but I'd had the research business, I'm guessing 7 or 8 years. I'd have to go back to actually look at, but probably.
So you're a young guy, you're 7 or 8 years into business, you're making $1 million plus in profit, and yet someone comes in and says it's broken in a way, right? Like, at least in terms of its long-term, ability to sell. And did you walk into those changes easily? I mean, were you sort of like, well, these are the experts, they know what they're doing, and we have the resources, let's do it? Or was it kind of like, holy shit, like I have to make this investment in a sales team and in researchers and all that? Was it nerve-wracking, or was it just kind of like, hey, I think these guys know where the North Star is, I'm going to follow it?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. I think I had a motivation, and it sounds quirky and ridiculous, but I had lived in Toronto and suffered through Toronto winters for a long time.
Yeah.
And my wife and I both were wanting to explore the world and live somewhere else, physically in another location, one that didn't enjoy such terrible winters. And so that was always on the kind of radar. So I spent some time living in Santa Cruz, California, trying to run the business from there. That failed. Had to move back. And again, that was another triggering event for me to say, what do I need to do to make this business less dependent on me? The kind of notion of like bringing in a general manager to kind of run the business was something that we tried. The other thing I'll say that was a key learning from making this switch comes down to compensation. I know leadership is thus, people are coin operated to some extent, or some people are coin operated, and knowing sort of how you tie compensation to outcomes is important. And I had a general manager running the company for me as part of this transition, and her compensation was tied to EBITDA. And as a project-based consultancy, we were able to, as I mentioned earlier, drive really good EBITDA margins, some months as high as 30%. And so she liked that because it enabled her to hit her variable compensation numbers. When we made some of these changes, in particular, moving from a project-based consultancy to a recurring revenue model, our EBITDA dropped. Because if you think about it, if you spend $30,000 for a subscription to our market research, that didn't hit in 1 month. Our accountant would divide it by 12 months. And so the revenue was spread out. Therefore, when we were making this change in the months, during this change, our EBITDA dropped dramatically. And I never changed her variable compensation. And what I came to realize in hindsight was that was on me. That was my mistake. I wanted to make the business more valuable because it would benefit me as the sole shareholder of the company. But I hadn't done the hard work to renegotiate her variable compensation model to align her with me. Right. And that ended up being just kind of souring the relationship. And in retrospect, I learned something I think important, which was for me to try to tie the compensation, my compensation, what I was chasing, which was in this case the value of the company, very closely to that of the key leadership team.
Yeah, we're having this conversation with someone the other day where comp plans dictate behavior. They just do. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times people will say, well, that's not true for me. I'm about the team first, or I'm about, and I'm like, yeah, but okay. But you probably assume that the people above you that are leading you, if you trust in them and respect them, that they've probably tied your comp to things they want to see. And if you're trying to please them, then whatever you want to call it, you know,
Yeah.
and so it is, we're always looking at it and going, usually when a solid employee is chasing the wrong thing, it's my fault, and it's usually because of how we're incentivizing them, or
Yeah.
how we're not incentivizing them, because we can talk all we want, but it's kind of like put your money where your mouth is, right? It's like, well, you're saying this, but you're paying me for this, so I'm going to do the thing you're paying me for.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. And we've seen that again and again. So, uh, and again, part of building a more valuable company is sort of improving your score on this thing called hub and spoke. And part of that is making sure that you get um, kind of owner-like effort out of your leadership team. And so we're big users of ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score, because
okay.
we want to know not only is the business got satisfied customers, but if the employees are super engaged in that business, they're likely to offer owner-like effort. And you think about like why do owners get sucked into the businesses that they run? Why did they get brought back into the operations? Oftentimes it's customers. It's customers saying, "Oh, I've done business with you forever. Can you manage my account?" Or I've got a problem, this guy screwed up and I want you to come in and fix it, Mr. Owner or Mrs. Owner. And that's why owners get sucked in. I mean, they know intellectually the business shouldn't be dependent on them, most of them do at least,
Right.
but they get sucked in because employees aren't able to perform at the same level they would do it.
Right.
And so measuring an ENPS, I think, is a good way to just to see a forward-looking indicator on how your employees are stepping up and kind of acting like owners.
Love that. I know that you wrote a book, The Automatic Business, where you talk about creating a recurring revenue model pretty much in any business. Do you really believe that I mean, pretty much, I mean, you've looked at thousands of businesses, I'm sure, if not tens of thousands. Can any business get into a recurring revenue model I know I heard you on a podcast talking about even car washes, and I'm like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
subscribe to one of those. I literally do. I like the idea. It's really weird. Like, I know over time I might actually spend more money doing that, but something about I can just show up whenever I want, almost like it's a buffet, right? I can eat till I'm fat, and get my car washed 100 times. I never do. Never do. I'm in New York. There's no point, but I pay it every month, and it just goes
Yeah,
through.
there's lots of examples of that. So yeah, I mean, what I think, so to back to your question,
Yes.
can any business create recurring revenue? No, I don't think every business can, but I think the vast majority of businesses can create some recurring revenue. I'll give you another example outside the car wash space, a dental practice, where they found that there was a high demand for a certain set of hours in their day. So they put a membership program together. Said, look, can't remember what it was, call it $100 a month. You can get 2 cleanings a year, and you will get first primary access to these 2 hours of the day, which are in hot demand. That's a dental practice where you have patients. And I think that what we need to do is instead of asking ourselves when we're evaluating, like, could I create recurring revenue in recruiting, for example?
Yeah.
Recruiting as a space is there's a prevailing model, right? You've got contingency firms, you've got what I can't remember the
Retained
name,
and contingent.
retained
Yep.
firms,
Yep.
and it's just the way the industry works.
Yeah.
And I always kind of laugh. I did a speech the other day, and I had an entrepreneur pull up his hand. He was in the hotel business, and he said, "Oh, we can't create recurring. It's just not the way we work in our industry."
Yeah.
And while I agree that in some industries it's harder than others, you're better served to ask yourself, how could this model apply to our industry,
Yes.
as opposed to, would this work? Because by definition, if you're going to pioneer a recurring revenue model, it isn't currently the prevailing model in your industry. Car washes forever and a day, where you bought them when you paid for your tank of gas.
Right.
And it took a company, Mr. Car Wash, to innovate on that space. Airbnb is in essence kind of a hotelier. It's a in that travel segment. It's not a hotel, but they reinvented the hotel business. I'll give you another example. H. Bloom is in the business of selling flowers. I wrote about it, actually, not about a customer. They said, who buys flowers? And of course, it's like, funerals, weddings, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, all the kind of classic reasons we buy flowers. Then they discovered that five-star hotels also buy flowers. But what's unique about five-star hotels is they buy them on a recurring basis because they always want that fresh bouquet of flowers on their reception table, right? So H. Bloom said, we're going to sell a subscription to flowers to five-star hotels. And the average lifetime value of an H. Bloom subscriber is $4,500. The average transaction in a flower store is something like $30, meaning you sell one customer if you're H. Bloom, and you're going to get $4,500 worth of lifetime value from that customer. You sell one customer if you're a flower store owner, you got to get up the next morning and hustle and try to sell the next guy and the next woman. And that's just the difference between a transaction business model and a recurring business model. But no retail flower shop owner was sitting there saying, oh, we could do this on subscription. They were saying, no, that's not the way our industry works. We have flower stores and we get high traffic location and we buy flowers from bulk and we throw out 60% of them because they're dead, but they're just a prevailing model in the industry. And so I think if you want to create recurring revenue in an industry, it takes a pioneer, it takes a strong stomach, it takes the willingness to say, what can we blow up about this industry? And how could we do this differently?
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's asking the questions. I mean, I think just being in that mindset of how could we? I mean, maybe we keep a contingent or retained model, but at the same time say, look, we'll constantly source for you for X amount of dollars per month,
100%.
like in our industry, and just create some revenue coming in on an ongoing basis. Now, I'm curious, the last 3 years have obviously been nuts, 3.5 years. I'm curious what they've done in kind of your space of evaluating businesses. I mean, we've seen things probably come to a screeching halt in most industries for better part of a couple of years, only to probably then take off like a rocket, only to now be dealing with, I guess, interest rates that just got back down below 8%. What's going on in the kind of the private equity world and buying businesses world?
Yeah. So a couple things, two big trends. One is interest rates. The other is COVID. So let's talk about interest rates. So interest rates, there's obviously a negative correlation or a direct, indirect, negative correlation. I'm trying to remember stats 101 between the value of your company and interest rates, right? So as interest rates go up, the value of your company goes down. And it's basically very straightforward. Most acquirers, in particular private equity groups, jack up their return on investment by borrowing money. The more expensive the money is, the lower the return on investment. Then therefore, to make the model work, they've got to pay less for the business. And that's the same in small business acquisition, but it's also the same in larger business acquisition. So there's a direct relationship, negative relationship between interest rates and the value of your company. So as interest rates goes up, values have gone down. So we've definitely seen that in entrepreneurship, in business. The other is COVID. So for businesses that had acquirers and entrepreneurs are trying to figure out what do their numbers mean, because for companies that were put out of business effectively by COVID, they want to whitewash those 2 years out of their P&L, and they want to say, oh, those didn't really happen, or those were unusual events or acts of God or whatever, and therefore you should take our profit from last year or in 2019. The inverse, though, from an acquirer's perspective, well, I was going to say the acquirer says, no, we're going to take a weighted average of your last 3 years of EBITDA, and we're going to apply a multiple to that. And the fact that 2 of those years were COVID years, that's not our problem, kind of thing. That will be their problem. So both sides are trying to argue something different, and the deals get done in the middle. Owners have had to lower their expectations, in part by interest rates, but also because in many cases they didn't do well during those 2 years. Equally, if private equity groups and other acquirers think they're going to just basically pick up businesses for pennies on the dollar because they had a couple of bad years during COVID, that's also not on from an entrepreneur's perspective, because anyone who knows, like anyone who's been running a business for a period of time knows that there's value there, and those were two exceptionally odd years. So I hate to be kind of wishy-washy in my answer, but I think deals are getting done in the middle where both sides are kind of coming to a bit of a meeting of the minds, so to speak.
Is the volume much lighter due to the
Yeah,
interest rate situation?
in particular, that's being driven by interest rates.
Yeah.
Yeah, the volume problem is because during and immediately after COVID, there were still a lot of transactions. They were in many cases bottom feeders, picking up businesses that were distressed.
Sure.
Now we're hopefully far enough past that period of time where that's less common, but we are definitely seeing less volume because transactions are affected. The number of transactions are affected by interest rates.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have any, I know it's just a guess, but I'm going to ask you because I think your guess will be better than mine. But I mean, do you have a feel on where things are going or an opinion, I guess, on where things are going from an interest rate standpoint?
Yeah, no, I'm not an economist. I don't play one on TV or podcast.
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure.
I just don't know. I mean, I think one of the things I have seen is that entrepreneurs tend to want to sell their business at the peak, right? So they're oftentimes you'll say an entrepreneur, hey, like, have you thought about selling your business? And the response will be like, yeah, in the next 3 or 4 years, I think the time will be right because, and they'll usually say like the economy will be booming, interest rates will be low, or my company will be doing well, et cetera. And what I've found is that that's usually a bit of a fool's errand trying to time the market because you're going to have to buy into whatever you sell out of, right? So just like selling a home, if you sell your business at a boom time, you're going to get a higher multiple, but you'll equally have to do something with the money. You can't put it under a mattress. So you're going to buy commercial real estate, luxury, vacation property, Bitcoin, whatever it is that you want to go buy, you're going to buy into the same market, and they're all affected by interest rates, right? So it's somewhat washed out. I think it's better rather than trying to time the market is to kind of time it based on what's going on for you. If you get, it's an old saying, great companies are acquired, not sold. So if you get approached by an acquirer, it's a good sign you built something of value and they want you. And that's a really interesting conversation to entertain because, it doesn't happen every day. And whatever's going on in the public market will be what you get to benefit from when you take those proceeds.
So before we, kind of conclude, talk to me a little bit about your software. Who's the target audience for that? I know it's for, business owners and founders, but is it guys doing $500,000 a year, $500 million a year, anything in between? Like, what does that look like? And what do they get from it? Is it kind of a self-serve thing, or do you guys, do consultation services on top of that?
Yeah, our flagship product is the Value Builder Score, which evaluates your company on 8 dimensions. We talked about a couple of them today: recurring revenue, hub and spoke, and they also get an estimate of value for that. And that's offered through a network of like 1,000 different advisors around the world who are trained to help you understand the number, as well as suggest ways to improve your Value Builder Score. Average score is 59 out of a possible 100. Those that get, and the offers those businesses are getting are on average 3.5 times pre-tax profit. Okay. For those that get their Value Builder Score up to 80 or greater, those businesses are getting 71% higher acquisition offers. So I don't know too many places where you're going to get a 71% return on your money. So it's a great way to take your biggest asset and make it more valuable. So yeah, valuebuilder.com if folks are curious about that.
And it doesn't matter business size?
Yeah, we really focus on companies that have between 1 and 20 million in annual revenue.
Okay.
Owner-operated businesses where it's the person, signing the checks who started the company is the person that we tend to work best with. Once a business is north of that, oftentimes a private equity investor is taking a position and they're going to have their own sort of point of view, but it's mostly independently run, owner-operated businesses. They're not startups, not tiny companies, usually have at least 10 employees, million in revenue, up to about 20.
That's perfect. I mean, I think that's a ton of, good chunk of our audience here. So we'll definitely put that link in the show notes. Thanks so much, John, for joining us. A pleasure to meet you.
It's great to be with you, Ken. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again, and thanks for all you've put out there. I've learned a lot from you, and it's finally great to meet you in person.
It's a pleasure.
All right, thanks again. Take care.